Grateful to finally kind of be out. I don't know about you, but I needed some fresh air. I was with my kids, and it does seem like there's been some challenges in life lately. Am I right? And there's been some mountains in our life and some struggles. And I wanted to speak specifically this Sunday on how to move mountains out of your life. How, because some of us, we face some, maybe some of you face, your loved ones have had the disease. Maybe you've had unemployment, loss of work. Maybe you're just tired of socially distancing your spouse, right? And you're like, don't touch me, right? I said I wasn't going to say this joke at the 9 a.m., but I'm going to say it anyway. Like, me and my wife, we bought a king-size bed when she got pregnant because she's like, don't touch me, right? So Tina's giving me a courtesy laugh because she heard the joke at 9. And my wife's back there. Don't worry, we ain't got no problems. I have 4 kids, all right? So anyway, I had much better timing at 9 a.m. Much better timing at 9 a.m. But with all that said, there's some mountains in our life that we need to remove. And I want to speak specifically on mountain-moving faith that Jesus talks about and what it looks like and a key that can help us in overcoming some of the obstacles that we face. And so with that, Mark the 11th chapter, before going into the verses that I want to preach from today, Jesus is hungry. He wants some breakfast one morning, and he shows up to a fig tree. Now, it says in the scriptures that it should be a season that this fig tree should have figs. So it's like you go to McDonald's and you say bacon, egg, and cheese biscuit. They should have bacon there, right? And so he goes to get figs. He doesn't see any figs on the tree, so he curses it. When he curses it, it immediately shrivels, some translations say, or some of the Gospels. Other Gospels say they came the next day. But what happened to that tree is it immediately withered and died in that moment. And what's amazing, I mean, that's pretty crazy, right? That's pretty amazing. The disciples, it's like, you at McDonald's and they say no bacon, and you're like, well, I curse you. And it just goes, right, just blows up right in that moment. They're amazed by this, but Jesus says, while this is amazing, this is something that you can walk in. You can walk in this same type of faith, this same type of belief, this same type of ability to take mountains in your life and move them out of your way. Now, y'all may want some masks on the front row because I'm going to spit. They may launch at you. But I'm going to back up a little bit. But see, what is beautiful, what's beautiful is Jesus takes this as an opportunity to teach them about faith. And so in Mark the 11th chapter, the 22nd verse, it says this. So Jesus answered and said to them, have faith in God. Now, I studied Greek. I took Greek. That faith in God is actually a possessive. It should say literally, have the faith of God. Jesus is saying the same faith that you saw me do, the same power that you saw me walk in, I want you to walk in that. Have God's type of faith. For assuredly, verse 23, I say to you, whoever says to this mountain, be removed and be cast into the sea, and does not doubt in his heart, but believes that those things he says will be done, he will have whatever he says. Now, I want you to see something very important here. That says happens 3 times to belief once. Why is that? Because a speaking heart is a believing heart. Your words will determine your belief. Very important you see that. He says then in verse 24, therefore I say to you, whatever things you ask when you pray, believe that you receive them and you will have them. Now, pretty amazing. I know I've been speaking theoretically. Some of y'all are looking at me like, I don't know if I should have came. It was easier online. But let me bring it down then a little bit about this belief in being able to move mountains out of your life. So now when you wake up in the morning, you used to wake up to that alarm. No, wait, we're not waking up to alarm. Quarantine, right? So the sun shoots in, you wake up, and you used to, how am I feeling? How was the night before? And that determined how your day was going to start, right? You were led by the emotions. Now Jesus is saying, instead of being emotionally led, that mountain leading your life, you can wake up in the morning and use your mouth and say, you know what? The word says, today is the day the Lord has made. I will drink coffee and then be glad in it? No, right? I will rejoice like you don't need even coffee to have a great day. Isn't that amazing? I only got one amen. The rest of you are like, no way, Pastor, right? So here the Lord is giving us insight that you have the ability to speak and watch things come to pass. He says, whatever things you ask and you pray. He puts no limits. Hear me, my friends. No limits to your ability to ask and believe for things from God. No limits. He says, whatever you ask in prayer, if you believe that you receive it, you'll have it. So this is now amazing. This mountain move, and you're going, in this season we're in the new normal, you're going to need mountain moving faith. But there's a key ingredient to watching this become active in your life. And so that's why he says in the next verse, in Matthew the 25th verse, it says, and whenever you stand praying, if you have anything against anyone, forgive him, that your Father in heaven may also forgive you your trespasses. But if you do not forgive, neither will your Father in heaven forgive your trespasses. Now these ain't topics pastors want to preach, right? Because this it throws a monkey in the wrench. I mean, God's forgiving. What's going on here? And I want you to know it's not that God doesn't extend forgiveness, but when you truly are forgiven from God, you can't help but forgive other people. So I want to walk through this, because if you get to live this life, you're going to get opportunities to walk in forgiveness. Am I right? You're going to get opportunities. And so I wanted to kind of look at some things. I want to go through some things to walk. How do we walk in forgiveness? How do we go through this? And to lay the foundation, I want to first start with, you can't live in a bubble wrap world. I had a preacher tell me that she said that she was a little heavier. You know, we've been in quarantine. Some of us, like me, I've been just, like the fridge is right there. I've just been eating, right? And she said, well, I'm just a little heavier because that's just bubble wrap around my spirit, because I don't want to be in the scratch and dent section in heaven, right? And so, but you can't, my friends, you can't live in a bubble wrap world. Jesus says in Luke the 17th chapter, the first verse, he says this, then he said to the disciples, it is impossible that no offenses should come, but woe to him through whom they do come. Jesus says you're going to get offended. You get on the seawall today and you drive for just a little bit, you're going to get an opportunity to get offended, right? You're going to get moments that there's struggles, and that's simple. There's other things that'll be large, but offenses, I just encourage you. Take this week and write down all the opportunities. I could have got offended here. I could have got offended here. You get opportunities, large or small, they're coming. Jesus says it's impossible. They're going to come. And it reminded me, y'all been playing board games with your kids? I've been playing Yeti and My Spaghetti. Anybody play Yeti and My Spaghetti? All right, this is 3 services, actually 4 services. Nobody plays Yeti and My Spaghetti. And believe me, you don't want to play it. It's for 4-year-olds. But and then, of course, you cook spaghetti later, and they're still trying to play the game when you want them to eat. But the board games reminded me of this game that I played when I was a kid called Mousetrap. And I don't know if you played this one, where you set off a little ball, and the ball set off a boot, and the boot set off another thing and another contraption. And next thing you know, there's a net coming, like Pee Wee Herman's Fun House, right, when he was making breakfast. Something comes down to catch your rodents. And see, that's the thing. When Adam fell, it set off a series of motions that offense, when sin came in the world, offense was going to come with that sin. And we all get opportunities to be offended. It doesn't matter. You just live life. You just breathe for a moment. And you're going to get some injustice against you. And the key is you cannot take the bait. That word offense in the Greek means scandalon, where we get our word scandalous. But in the Greek, in the literal form, they used it was literally used as a hunter would use bait, scandalon, the bait, to catch his prey. And see, what Satan has been doing for 6,000 years is he's been using, he hasn't changed his method. It's just interesting that it's like we used to live at the apartment, and there was a moment where it was normal temperature, but a cold front came. And when that came, everything that was on the outside decided it wanted to be warm with me and my family on the inside. And of course, one mice becomes 2 mice and they have babies, and then you have a problem, right? And I remember I was talking with our head usher, Randall, love you, brother. I was talking to my head usher, and I've been trying to use cheese to get the mice. Like, because, I've always seen the cartoons, right? Cheese, even stinky cheese will work. And he said, no, you need peanut butter. And it was interesting that you didn't even know that. Peanut butter has this ability. I don't know if it's the smell of peanut butter, but it always seemed to attract. And see, our peanut butter is a fence, and it's been working for 6,000. Satan's not even had to change his approach. He simply allows sin against you to produce sin inside of you. That's why we see with the first brothers, Cain and Abel, right? Abel offers a great sacrifice that's pleasing the Lord. Cain does not. Cain's offended. Cain's like, what's going on, man? And God comes to Cain and he says, sin is crouching at your door. There's opportunities for sin. Don't let it have dominion over you. What had happened? He had become offended with God, that God wouldn't receive his great offering. And that offense was crouching at his door, that he would now take it and let it develop into unforgiveness, let that develop into bitterness and anger and wrath. And that's why when offense happens against you and you don't deal with it correctly, what then takes place is you find yourself in a prison. But I don't want to get ahead of myself. The second thing I want to kind of ask about this forgiveness and walking in forgiveness in this time, in this season, is how many times do I need to forgive? Now, we find this in Matthew, the 18th chapter, at the beginning of the verse. The disciples, they start arguing who's the greatest. Peter's like, I'm the greatest disciple. Jesus said he'd build the church on me, right? He'd misinterpret him. And then John's like, whatever, dude. I'm the disciple that Jesus loved, right? And so they're just arguing back and forth who's the greatest. It ends up in offense happening. And I'm sure John took a swing at Peter maybe. And maybe it was the seventh time that day because they're fishermen. They're tough dudes. Took another swing at him. And he's like, dude, you missed me and I forgave you. And then he goes up to Jesus. Now, again, I'm kind of just adding in that's not really there, but I'm adding in because Peter then asks this question, trying to prove his spirituality. It says in Matthew, the 18th chapter, the 21st verse, then Peter came to him, the Lord, and said, Lord, how often shall my brother sin against me and I forgive him? Looking over at John, kind of eyeing him, up to 7 times? And Jesus said to him, I do not say to you up to 7 times, but up to 70 times. 7. And Peter's like, oh, not only do I have to be good at forgiving, I got to be good at math, right? And so 490 times Jesus says you have to forgive. And if you look at it, that's why some translations, because it's in the Greek perfect tense, 490 times in a day, some translations say. I mean, that's like once every 5 minutes if we're doing math here. Like, what? I don't know if you've had anybody once every 5 minutes. Like, they definitely got issues if that's going on, right? And so Jesus throws out this impossibility. Like, you want me to forgive up to 490 times a day? Jesus. I mean, fool me once, shame on me. Fool me twice. I ain't that stupid. But Jesus is giving this opportunity to walk in the impossible. This opportunity to walk as he walks. So how do we do that? How do we forgive 490 times a day? I'm glad you would ask because Jesus talks about this parable. He says right after this, he says there's a guy that owes a king $1 billion, if we put it in today's terms, $1 billion debt, but you could even make it greater. Jesus is trying to make the point it's unpayable. So you got $1 billion debt that this guy owes, and the rules of this land, the rules of the kingdom of this place is if you can't pay the debt, you can't file Chapter 11, you got to go to jail to serve it off. So this dude is looking at a lifetime sentence for a debt he can't pay back. And so he falls upon the mercy of the king. He says, King, please forgive me. I've caused this issue. I have a problem. I can't pay this debt back. Can you wipe it clean? Can you give me mercy? The king takes a step back. He says, you know what? I'm going to forgive you. I'm going to forgive you of this $1 billion debt. Now, that's amazing, right? $1 billion is a lot of money, right? If you don't think so, we're going to have a giving program right after this. Some of y'all offended by that, right? Anyway, so this guy who's the billionaire forgiven of this debt, he goes and he starts collecting from his people that owe him money because he's a businessman. And one of the people owes him money. Now, a lot of people misinterpret this, but if you were to put it in today's dollars, it's about a $15,000 debt. Now, is a $15,000 debt a lot of money? Now, again, if you don't think it's a lot of money, we have a giving program after this that we can. So it's a lot of money. It's not chump change here, but it's not $1 billion, right? And so the guy says, the $15,000, he's like, I can't pay my 15 grand debt. Can you forgive me? And the billionaire looks at him and says, no, dude. You know justice. You know the rules of the land. You know what's right in this kingdom. Right? And that's sometimes our own justification, our own rules in our mind. Says you can't pay the debt. You got to serve it off in prison. So he has him cast into prison. The king hears of this, Jesus says. And he calls in the billionaire. He says, whoa, bro, what are you doing? I forgave you of $1 billion debt, a debt you could not pay. And yet you can't extend a 15 grand forgiveness. Jesus says, beautiful. He says, we cast you into outer darkness where there's gnashing of teeth, representation of hell. And a lot of Christians, when we hear that, we think, well, then I got to forgive that person because I don't want to end up in hell one day. But what we don't realize is the hell starts immediately when you choose to not forgive someone. It's not a moment of, oh, now then I'm going to end up in hell. The hell happens, the gnashing of the teeth, the weeping happens when you say, nah, I'm not going to forgive. And you cut off the flow, the love of God, the reason you were created. And so you end up becoming this reservoir and you become stagnant in what God's done in your life. There's a guy named Louis Zampini. He was a World War II veteran. Started before that, was an Olympian. And as a World War II veteran, he was a pilot on a plane, and his plane got shot down over the Pacific. And he's going to end up at sea for, I believe it was 47 or 57 days, something like that. He's at sea for a very long time. Famished, looking for help. And finally, help comes, except the help is not the American forces, it's the Japanese forces. And so when they capture him, they nurse him to health, and then after nursing him to health, they put him in a prisoner of war camp. And he ends up in this prisoner of war camp, and the guy that's the warden or in charge over this camp is called the Bird, a Japanese man. And he's a harsh man. He's a brutal man. He is going to show the prisoners and give them no hope that you will die here, either through sickness, starvation, or struggle. I'm going to make sure that you die in this place. You will never see home again. And so he brought this brutal punishment against all the prisoners of war in that camp. And they didn't know. They didn't know if the American forces were going to win. But one day, an American jet flew over, and they knew that they were going to be set free. And he gets free, and he gets back to America. And what's interesting is you would think he'd just be happy and go about his life, get married, have a family, but he actually turns to alcoholism. And he begins to struggle and can't find his place, and he feels guilt that he made it out and others did it. He feels unforgiveness for what the Japanese soldiers, Bird, did against him. And so he turned to alcohol. And alcohol could only numb the pain, it couldn't solve it. But yet one night he was invited to a church service, and in that moment he came down to the front, knelt at the altar, and said, Jesus, I want you. And he said, I got up from that place different. I can't explain it. I didn't understand mentally what was going on. I watched a broadcast even this morning just to make sure I had the story right. He said I couldn't explain it, but I would understand that, as I read the scriptures, that I became a new creation inside, that the old had passed and I became new. And what he said, the alcoholism went out of my life and the struggles went out and my days were better. And what I found is I was able to forgive Bird. I wonder if he had never stepped into that forgiveness. And see, that's the thing Jesus is trying to tell us here. We look at 490 as impossible, but Jesus is saying, yeah, it's impossible by your own strength, but it's possible with me. And when you have a true revelation of God forgiving you and extending that forgiveness to you, you can't help but forgive other people. You say, but Pastor, you don't know what they did to me. And see, here's the thing about offense and struggles with offense. We tend to place greater levels of struggle based upon our expectations on a person. Am I right on that? Like you're going to drive down the seawall today, and good chance you're not going to get offended by somebody, right? Like you're not going to give them the bird. You'll give them 2 peas. You'll be like, all right, whatever, right? But let your spouse do something against you. And there's a greater expectation. There's a greater, I'm expecting more out of you than I am. And that's why you'll even hear people that leave the church. They say, those church people, right? They're just full of hypocrites. I've had people in the bar, they're nicer than people in the church. And really what happens is you have a low expectation of people in the world. And you had a great expectation of people in the church. And so church people should act like Jesus. Why are they and people in the bar, you're okay. If they curse you out, you don't care. Like you're not really putting them on the same level playing field because you had different expectations. And see, when those expectations don't get met, you have the expectations don't get met, there's an opportunity to grieve. There's an opportunity to be offended. And you have to do something with it. And understanding that you've been forgiven, but also, I love it because Jesus shows us how to walk out forgiveness in a practical way. What I mean by this, a grave offense requires a measured response. I say this because I've grown up in the church. I'm the grandson of a pastor, and I've heard many of us come out of forgiveness meetings and we hear you're not supposed to be offended. And so something happens against us and we're like, I'm not offended by that, right? And so we just throw out that language because we know logically that's the right answer, but we're not truly dealing with the offense. Why is that important? Because it reminded me of a story. My dad, when we lived across the street, he took his golf clubs because he didn't like playing golf. And he cut them for my height. And I was a little bit older than Robbie, and I remember he cut them, but he left the jagged, on the end of the club, he left a jagged end. He didn't smooth it out for some reason. And so as a 5-year-old, when you see a golf ball, like, you're just trying to whack-a-mole, right? Like, you want to go after it. And so I grab the club, and I swing it, and I go, wham! And I hit it right in the knee. And it stays there. Like, I let my, and I pull it out. And I run in bleeding, and it would have been bad had I've come in, actually it was in my grandmother's house when I walked in, Mimi, and I walked in and I was bleeding everywhere. It would have been bad if my dad said, just put a Band-Aid on it, walk it off, you'll be all right, right? Right? That would have been, but yet that's what we do in the church a lot of times when we've been gravely offended. We just say, that's okay, I'm not offended, right? Because we hear, we say love's not offended, right? But it says love's not easily offended. Yeah, there's some things that shouldn't offend you. The color of the carpet should not offend you, okay? Like there's some things, I may not shake your hand after this. You probably shouldn't be offended by that, right? That shouldn't be a big deal. But there's other things that you may face, that you faced when you were a young kid. You got touched wrong, or maybe you had a business deal go wrong, or maybe you've been a part of a divorce. There's some things that are grave offenses, and you have to allow that to heal. And you don't want to have friends that are like sitters instead of surgeons. What do I mean? Sitters are ones that you call up and you say, I went through this and they did this to me. They're like, those people, they're so wrong. They're evil. We're going to pray for you. Bless them with the brick, God. And what are they doing? They're allowing you to justify in your mind the court of opinions that they are wrong and you're right. Instead of having a sitter friend, you need a surgeon friend that's going to come in and speak the word, speak truth, cut out that cancer of unforgiveness, so that you can walk in love, you can walk in your destiny. You don't have to be trapped and in prison in hell. Y'all okay? And so Jesus says this. He gives us some ideas on how to cut that out in Matthew the 5th chapter, the 44th verse. It says, but I say to you, love your enemies. Bless those who curse you. Do good to those who hate you. And pray for those who spitefully use you and persecute you. We started this sermon off in Matthew, the 11th chapter, where Jesus says, when you say to the mountain, it'll be removed. One of the things that I've found in my own life is that when I wanted to move the mountain of unforgiveness, I had to use my words. I had to pray for those that had done evil against me, had done wrong against me. The first time that I recognized this in my life was with my father. See, my father, in my high school years, got a divorce from my mom, and it was a very messy divorce. There was a lot of struggle there. There was a lot of injustice there, what had happened. And in this moment, you couldn't have been able to tell it from the outside, but I got cold inside. In fact, I remember even going to sermons, and it was like Charlie Brown, like the preacher would be preaching my senior year, and I'd just be like, just sitting there, why? The older congregation, y'all know what some of y'all know what Charlie Brown is. Anyway, why? I didn't relate. I'd gotten cold. And I remember in 2001 when I rededicated my life, I got super excited about Jesus, like just on fire for the Lord, going from meeting to meeting, loving people. I mean, it was so crazy. I mentioned this at the 10 a.m. that like I'd come out because I rededicated my life at Joel Osteen's church, and I'd come from his meeting that Sunday morning, and on the way home, it was about an hour drive, I'd listen to another sermon. When I got home, I'd cook a meal, listen to another sermon. I was just so on fire for God and living this out. And I remember my mom invited me to go see my grandfather, not my one here, but her dad in San Antonio. And on the way back, I still have this memory. It was right in between the loop of Beltway 8 that intersects with I-10. And on this, she just mentioned my dad. It wasn't anything negative. She just had mentioned him in a comment. It was something, I forgot the comment she made. But when she mentioned his name, I vomited this vitriol of grossness and disgust and just this hatred and anger and bitterness towards him. And when it came out of my mouth, I was like, oh! Because remember, I'd rededicated. I was new. I was walking in love. Jesus was all in me. But yet when I spoke, this all came out. And I looked at it and I was like, God, what do I do with that? And it was in this moment that God said, there's a root of bitterness in you. See, roots are underneath. Roots are hidden. They don't come out till the right time, actually the wrong time, right? The weeds. But it was in this moment that God said, you got to use your words to remove this mountain. You got to dig up that root. And he said, I want you to begin to pray for your dad. I want every time you think of your dad, whatever you think, whatever thoughts, the thoughts of maybe anger, distrust, the thoughts of how he abused you and how he did you wrong. When you get those thoughts, I want you to say these two words out of your mouth. I want you to say, I love my dad and I forgive my dad. And if I were to give you just an object, if my dad was standing right here in our relationship when the divorce had happened, I started moving away from my dad. Even though we still talked once a week. We still had a cordial conversation. Truly in my heart, I did not want anything to do with him, and I was walking away from him. But as I began to use my words to dig up this root, I just simply said, I love my dad and I forgive him. And it's almost like I was playing ping pong with Satan, right? Because it was like, okay, well, you're going to say that? Well, let me bring up this image. Well, he did this to you. And what about this or that? And I would say it some days up to 30 times a day. And I remember working as a waiter. I mean, somebody would be like, I want some iced tea. And under my breath, I'd be like, I love my dad. I didn't want to say it out loud, right? Because they're like, I just want iced tea. Just iced tea. Didn't want your life story right now. But even under my breath, I love my dad. I forgive my dad. And it's like as I was saying it, God was shifting my heart, turning it little by little, word by word. And I can't tell you the moment it happened. I can't tell you the day, but it was several months later of this constant prayer. I love my dad. I forgive my dad. That when the time came, it was months later, I remember talking to him on the phone, and there was actual feelings of affection. There was a bloom of the fruit of righteousness that I could truly love him. I could truly walk with him, even though the injustices that had happened. And that was the mercy that I found. And what's beautiful that I found by praying for those that persecute you, praying for those that do things against you, is that helps guard your heart as you walk in this life, because Jesus said it's impossible for offenses not to come. You're going to get an opportunity to get offended. And I've been a pastor now for 10 years. I've had at least once a year, there's the opportunity, because and sometimes it's because of my own sin. I'm not perfect. Sometimes I do things wrong. Other times I just have to make leadership decisions, and it just doesn't work out for everybody, and people get offended because of the decisions I have to make. But there's times that people will get offended with you, and you're like, oh, but what do? I begin to pray for them and love them. I remember when I first got here, it's 2011, and some people came and they said, we're going to be with you forever till Jesus comes back. And of course I was young, so I was like, yeah, praise God, right? And now I just like, time will tell, right? But so it was interesting this week because they'd been with us a little bit, like 3 months, and the Lord said, I want you to preach on unforgiveness. And I took a trash bag and I'd kept it for 3 weeks. We had Wednesday night meals. I took the trash bag with a Wednesday night meal in it, and I kept it for 3 weeks. And our congregation at that time was about this middle section, right? It was about that big. And so I had every one of them smell the trash. Like obviously I've grown in my preaching ability. Okay, so I'll just describe it to you with words. But I was like, and I said, this is what unforgiveness is like. And everybody's like, yeah. I was like, you don't want this in life. They're like, yeah. And the people that said, we're with you till Jesus comes back, they get offended that week with somebody else in my church. And they're like, take my side, Pastor. And I'm like, I ain't taking your side. You're wrong. Forgive them. And they're like, no, Pastor. And we're like, we're leaving and we hate you and Jesus doesn't like you either. And you're not chosen. And you're like, what? Stop it. What do? How do you come from that moment, right? You get up in the morning and you pray for them. I began to pray for them. I began to pray for their family, pray for their kids. Pray that God would bless them. Pray the best for them. Sincerely mean it. And what I found is when I walk in that, God promotes me level by level by level by level. See, if you try to take it in your own hands, you end up in that prison and you don't get near your destiny. And I found there's been a lot of people that ain't like me, and I just pray for them and I love on them. Sometimes I give them offerings and gifts. And you say, why you do all that, Pastor? Because God blesses me for it. And he promotes me. And I've seen it time and time again. And so if you allow this forgiveness to flow in you, it's a key to moving the mountains in your life. But if you try to be justified in the court of your own mind, the court of your own opinion, and you say, but Pastor, you don't know what they did to me. Dude, you're 40 now. Stop it. Yeah, we can't go back and change it. Yeah, it was hard. Yeah, it's a big deal. But you're 40 now. You're going to allow that to now ruin your marriage? You're going to allow that to now ruin your relationship with your kids now? Let's do something about it. Because that bleeds over. Unforgiveness bleeds over into other relationships. Amen. It's always interesting because you talk about forgiveness, you ain't getting amens normally. Because the Holy Spirit starts bringing people to your mind that you need to forgive. And forgiveness is always constant. My dad's passed away 9 years ago, and Satan still tries to bring up things, and I still say, you know what, I love my dad. He's amazing. He's having a good time with me up in heaven. They having a good, I just speak it out of my mouth. Even if sometimes I ain't feeling it because I hit my thumb with a nail, right? Working on my deck, that's why. So, amen. So I just want to encourage you guys as Denzel comes up here and plays today. I want to encourage you guys to walk in forgiveness. I'm not going to necessarily give a salvation call, but I want to talk to your hearts today about forgiving, getting out of that prison of unforgiveness. And so just with every head bowed and just eye closed, I want to just give you an opportunity to maybe forgive some people. You know, I didn't mention a couple of things. Maybe you're offended with God right now. Maybe you don't think he did some things that you thought he should have done. And you're offended with him, or maybe you're offended with yourself. This is the moment you don't want that to be a prison in your heart. You don't want it to allow it to affect other relationships around you. I just want to give you this opportunity. We all get opportunities to be offended. We all struggle. But this is the moment you can be free. It seemed impossible, right? But Jesus says if you concentrate on the Father's forgiveness for you, you can forgive others. So I just want you to take a moment. Use your words right now. Whoever the Holy Spirit's brought to your mind, I just want you to say, you know what, I forgive them, I love them. Let it be words out of your mouth. Maybe it's under your breath, but let it be words. Let it be words that transform your heart. God, I love you. God, I just ask that you would show us those that we need to forgive. We need to pray for, God. Let your mercy reign in our hearts, God. If you're watching me right now on Facebook and you say, you know what, Pastor, I need to forgive some people. I just want you to you don't have to put their name. You can just put, I forgive them. You can keep it secret. But put in those message comments, put, I forgive them. I forgive them. Let that forgiveness flow to you. You say, Pastor, I can't do it. I say, you can do it. Start with your words. Let the feelings follow. Let your belief follow. Father, I just pray for all of our hearts today, God. My own included, God, that you would allow forgiveness to flow through us, God. Jesus, your word says that love covers a multitude of sins. Father, that we don't have to hold sins against us anymore, but we can release those. We release those into the heart of the Father right now. Just like Jesus, when he was on the cross, he said, forgive them, Father, for they know not what they do. If the people that did the perpetrations against us, God, if they just knew who they were, they wouldn't have done it. They wouldn't have done it, God. So we just ask right now for mercy for them. Father, we pray that you would transform their mind, transform their heart to know who they were created to be. God, that you would bless them, that you would pour out your favor upon them, God. Let their hearts be changed, even in the midst of this pandemic. And God, we release them to you. I thank you for this in Jesus' name.